and welcome back to another episode of the Hard Money Talk Show. Today, we're going to be talking to a good friend of mine, Cameron, and she's going to be talking about parental death, unfortunately. Cameron has an interesting story where her father actually passed away without a will, and then she had to take on the role of primary caregiver to her mother, who actually had Alzheimer's. So she's going to talk to us today about the hard money conversations about when your parents get ill and what it's like to talk to your parents about wills and things like that before they pass away. And this is a very uncomfortable conversation, especially if money is not something that you've ever talked to your parents about before. It can be very, very tricky to discuss this, especially with your adult parents as their health starts to decrease. And so welcome, Cameron, to the Hard Money Talk Show. Let's go get into the interview. So thanks so much for being on the show, Cameron. I'm so glad to have you here as a friend, but also I think you have a lot of great information. So thanks for being here today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, actually, I just got back from spending about 5 days with my dad and over the holidays. And money is such a hard conversation to talk to your parents about, especially when you're an adult and you have parents that are aging and all of that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is how to have those hard money conversations with your, aging parents, I guess to say. And I kind of, I am the executor on both of my parents' wills. And so that's, yay me, because I'm the oldest. I know we're going to talk about, I know your father, in the intro, I talked a little bit about your father. I know passed away without a will, correct? So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that? So we'll start there and just walk us through like that whole journey. Like, did you have any conversations with your parents growing up about money? Like, was that a taboo topic? You don't talk about it?
I'm from the South, and my father always told us when we were growing up, you don't talk about money. It's not polite. You don't ask people how much money they make. You don't ask people how much things cost. And so my dad was really tight-lipped about money. My mom didn't have the same hangups. And my mom, actually, she was a stay-at-home mom. And so I learned really about managing money through her by watching her. We didn't have conversations, but I watched how she managed money. But my dad, on the other hand, like I said, didn't talk about money. And for anyone out there who is thinking, oh, I don't need to talk to my parents about their finances, they've probably got things under control. Maybe they've had those like brief conversations, oh, mom and dad, do you have estate planning documents? And if your parents are like, oh, yeah, don't worry about it. We've got everything, we've got it under control. We've done everything. No, don't accept that as an answer. Mm-hmm. You need to press, because my dad was an attorney. And I assumed, of course, that he would have estate planning documents, right?
Right.
I'm sure he wrote wills in his lifetime for other people. He didn't focus on estate planning, but he knew the importance of having these documents. And I never thought to ask him whether he had a will. I never thought to ask him about what sort of funeral plans he wanted. I remember my mom telling me after they got divorced, you need to find out what your dad's final wishes are, because he would jokingly say, sharpen my toes and hammer me into the ground. That was his response. Like, Dad, what do you want? What are your final wishes? And so he would joke about it. I think probably, it really gets down to issues with mortality, and he didn't want to have to think about it. And what happened was, at the age of 61, my dad died of a heart attack in his sleep. He was in a second marriage, and as far as I know, he did not have a will. And I have no idea what he wanted to be done with his assets, his belongings. I honestly don't know whether he had much to pass on, because my stepmother handled everything. She settled the estate, and because there was no will spelling out who was supposed to get what, my sister and I didn't get anything if there was anything to be passed on. And it's not that I had a contentious relationship with my stepmom. Maybe, whatever assets my dad had, she had to use them to pay whatever debt he might have had. I had no idea, because he didn't clue us in to what his financial situation was. I did get a few of his belongings, but only after my stepmother passed away. And my stepbrother gave some of the things that belonged to my dad to me, including his desk that was in his office. And this mattered more to me than anything, really, because my mom had picked out this desk for him. And I really wanted this desk. And I was so glad that I got it. I'm lucky because a lot of families end up in court
Right.
fighting over this. And the thing is, people don't realize if you die without a will, state law determines who gets what. And so oftentimes it's going to be the spouse. So if you have kids, they might not get anything if they're still a surviving spouse. And if it's a second spouse, a second marriage, or you've got stepkids and you want the stepkids to get everything because you don't like your kids from your first marriage, they're not going to get anything because they're not blood. Say, okay, I've got this under control. You need to say, okay, well, where are the documents? I don't need to know what I'm getting. I just need to know, is there a will? Is there a trust? And where is it? You need to tell me how to find it. And have you updated it recently? If you got divorced and you're remarried or you're not remarried, you need to update that will. I mean, my mom had not updated her documents. And, I encouraged her when she started showing signs of memory loss to get those documents updated so that everything would be in place as her memory declined. And we can talk about that more later. But it's just these. Don't take your parents, if they're ignoring you when you ask this question, or they're like, oh, I've got it covered. Well, tell me, where's the document? I need to know, because really what happens is you're going to be the one who has to deal with the mess that's left behind.
And it's interesting because my ex-husband's father passed away during COVID, and not from COVID, but because he had one of those surgeries that got postponed due to COVID, and he ended up having a stroke. And he had everything laid out, his last wishes, what he wanted to happen. He was very clear that if something were to happen to him and he was in a vegetative state, that he did not want to be, resuscitated or whatever. And so he had all those wishes laid out very, very clearly. So the family knew exactly what he wanted after he had the stroke and didn't have, he was in a vegetative state. So they knew exactly what he would want to do. And those are really hard conversations. As you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, I have both of my parents' wills. I have both of their power of attorney, all of those legal documents in my personal safe. But do I know what their wants and wishes are? Like, if they were to have a stroke, they both are remarried. My parents are divorced. They both are remarried. Do I know, do their significant others know what they want to be done? And if I'm the remaining person, right? Do I know what they want, what their wishes are? And I don't. So I'm like, oh, I got to have this conversation, but it's so hard. It's like, so when you die, what do you want me to do with you? You know what I mean? It's hard, especially if you weren't raised talking about it. And which is funny because tell everybody what you do for a living. Cause it's funny what you do for a living so yeah, just tell everybody what you do for a living.
I am a personal finance journalist. And so I have no problem talking about money. And the thing is, I did not start writing about personal finance though until a year before my father passed away.
Okay.
Actually, no way. I take that back. I got my job writing with Kiplinger's Personal Finance shortly after my father passed away.
Okay.
And so it was after his death. And so it never even dawned on me to have a conversation with him about his finances. In fact, it didn't dawn on me to have a conversation with my mom about her finances. So you fall into two camps. You either haven't had the conversation because you don't realize it's important, or you realize it's important, but you're afraid to have the conversation because, like you said, Lauren, it's awkward, and it's okay to say that to your parents. Look, I know this is awkward, but it's going to be a lot more awkward if I don't have the answers to these questions, if I don't know what you want. And you don't have to say, what do you want when you die? You can couch it in softer terms, like, what are your final wishes, or how can I honor your wishes? I need to know what they are. And you don't have to use the word death, just say, what are your wishes?
So after he passed away and then your stepmom passed away, then I'm assuming your stepbrother was the executor at that point.
For my stepmother.
Okay. So my the same kind of thing is on my dad's side. So my dad is remarried, and so me and my stepbrother are like co-executors on their estate together, right? So me and him probably should sit down and have a conversation
You should.
as well,
You
because
should.
we have to manage that together. I'm sure that can cause some problems, I'm assuming, amongst families if you're fighting over the estate.
The crazy thing is you can have family members who get along, but once money comes into the picture, it makes people act crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just, I mean, and I've heard this from so many estate planning attorneys. I've seen it personally, saying that, everyone gets along until someone dies, and then everyone starts fighting over who gets
Mm-hmm.
what, and they'll fight over the smallest things. So it certainly is important for you and your stepbrother to have conversations. Anyone who has siblings really should be talking to their siblings before they even have conversations with their parents, because you and your siblings need to get on the same page. You need to figure out, well, who's going to have the conversation with mom and dad? Is it one of us or all of us? When should we have the conversation? How do we want to start the conversation? And also talk about the roles that each of you is willing to play in your parents' lives as they age. Hey, I live closest to mom and dad, so if they have health issues, I'm willing to be the one who's going to take them to their doctor's appointments. I'm going to be the one who's willing to provide that hands-on help. But if I'm going to be providing that hands-on care, maybe you, sibling who lives in California across the country, will be willing to pitch in financially and help out that way, because you can't be here. Figure those things out beforehand. That's going to reduce the chance of fighting when those emergencies crop up, and they will. They're going to be emergencies with your parents as they age. So if you can figure out that beforehand, it makes it easier. No one wants to talk about finances in the middle of an emergency. So if you've got that sorted out, it just makes it easier to deal with a difficult time.
Right. And I know that my grandmother has Lewy body dementia. And so her mind comes in and out all the time. And just this past year, my dad had to move her out of her home and into my uncle's home. So my dad's brother. So that's been challenging. They just this past summer, they sold her house. And that was interesting because they sold her house. She's still alive, but she's not with it. I mean, I'm sure we're going to go and talk about your mother, and she had Alzheimer's, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So selling somebody's all of their property while they're still alive, it's like you're grieving somebody who's still alive, right? So we all went through her house, and it felt, my grandmother was a very, like, you don't ever touch anything in her house. So it felt very like me and my cousins, we were all like going through her stuff, and it was like stuff we had never seen before, because you just never touch any of grandma's stuff. Like, she had so much china, and it was like forbidden. We all felt like, oh, this feels very strange. But so when we did that, and they sold her house, I know that the house went to one of the siblings, and my dad lives far away, so he travels and helps take care of respite stuff, and she's in a daycare during the day, like an adult daycare where she does crafts and stuff like that, and so it's been interesting watching him deal with his mother as she declines. Her health, she's 96, her health is amazing, but her mind, she thinks there's dogs and trees and people. I mean, the stories she tells are hilarious. But it's sad, it's sad. So it's hard to have conversations with her now, but they had those conversations before they, when they saw her declining, they were like, okay, we need to like get her estate in order now before she starts, like, before we lose her completely. So when you started seeing your mom kind of decline and maybe started seeing her mind slip a little bit, did you know what was going on, or how did you start those conversations with her?
So initially, I thought that her memory loss was a result of hearing loss. She had no hearing in her left ear because she had a benign tumor.
Mhm.
behind that ear. And I had actually had a conversation with her about getting long-term care insurance. I lived in Washington, D.C. for several years, moved back to my home state of Kentucky, and I had that conversation with my mom right away. I'm like, Mom, you need to look into long-term care insurance. You live alone, and if you need care, this is going to help pay for the care. And this was well before she was experiencing any sort of memory loss. And so she took my advice and she reached out to an insurance agent, but she couldn't get it because of that tumor behind her ear. It made her
Oh.
too much of a risk factor. And it can be difficult to qualify for long-term care insurance, but that insurance will pay for care. I mean, Medicare does not pay for long-term care. Medicaid will, but you have to be impoverished. And so it's incredibly expensive. And I dropped the ball. She could not get long-term care insurance, and I should have had a conversation with her then. Let's look at your finances, figure out how you would pay for care if you needed it. Let's discuss what type of care you would want if you ever needed it. But again, I didn't have that conversation. And like I said, I thought it was hearing loss when she would ask me questions and then ask again just a few minutes later after I'd given her an answer. And then it became painfully obvious one night when I was at her house visiting with her, and she asked me to um, go out to her patio and look at this bench she had purchased. So we went and we looked at the bench, we came back inside, and then a few minutes later, she said, "Do you want to see my new bench?"
Mm.
And I knew then that hearing loss was not the problem. I was thinking, well, this isn't something that I said, and she couldn't hear me. We went and looked at this bench, and it's only a few minutes later, and she's forgotten already that she just showed me this bench. And so suddenly I'm thinking, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to prepare for the fact that my mom likely has some form of dementia? I didn't want to have a conversation though, because I didn't want to be the one telling her I thought she was forgetting things.
Mm.
The money side of the conversation wasn't difficult for me. I just didn't want to have to say, Mom, we need to talk because you're forgetting things. And so really I just stalled, and I ended up reaching out to her primary care provider. And I asked him, "Hey, the next time my mom is in, could you encourage her to get tested for dementia?" And he did. So I
Mm.
find that reaching out to that third party can really be helpful in
That's a
these
good
sort of
idea.
situations,
Mhm.
especially if there is dementia, asking a doctor, asking a legal or financial professional that your parent works with, asking a family friend. And so she did get tested, and that first round of testing, she came back and said, "Well, I don't have Alzheimer's disease." And either she was lying to me or the doctor didn't do a good job of testing her. And she had a friend who stepped up and said, "Hey, I want you to go and meet with another doctor." And that time I went with her to get the results. The doctor said she had Alzheimer's disease, and I knew that we needed to get her all of her legal documents updated. The thing is, you had to be mentally competent to sign those documents. And
Mm.
don't assume that just because there is that diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia that your parent, your loved one is no longer competent enough to sign these documents. Meet with an attorney. The attorney is going to ask your parents, your grandparents some questions to find out, does this person still understand what he or she is about to sign? And so, even though my mom was forgetting some short-term issues, she was still of sound mind. She knew what she was signing. She named both me and my sister her financial powers of attorney. She named us her healthcare proxy so that we could make medical decisions for her. She had a living will drafted that spelled out what sort of end of life medical treatment she did and did not want. So we had all of those documents in place. And then my mom and I went to the bank, and we let the bank know that I was her power of attorney. And that's how I started to get involved with her
Mm.
finances. Really, the attorney was like, "Go to the bank, let the bank know." And so then I created an online bank account for her. She didn't even use a computer. She was not tech savvy at all. And
Mhm.
that worked in my favor. So I was her power of attorney, created an online bank, and I started monitoring things from behind the scenes. I didn't want to just come in. We had conversations as were necessary, but I did have to play detective because she was forgetting things. And as I was getting involved, I was having to figure out things by looking at her mail, going through her tax documents,
Mm.
gathering as much information as I could about her finances so that I could slowly start managing her finances for her more and more. But like I said, I didn't just go in and take over. And it would have been a lot easier if I had had these conversations with her while she was still of sound mind, because we could have made a list of all of her accounts. I mean, there was one account that I didn't even know existed until it was almost turned over to the state as unclaimed property. And
Wow.
it was an account with $50,000 in it.
Wow.
Yes. And I found out about it. I was able to get access to it because I was her power of attorney. And that was a big chunk of money that was used to pay for her care in an assisted living facility, and it covered the cost of care for, nearly a year. But I didn't even know it had existed because I hadn't
How did you
taken the
find out about it? Like, where did
letters. She lived with us. So she lived independently for the first 2 years after her diagnosis. And I'd hired someone to drive her on errands. And then I hired someone to kind of come in and stay with her a few days a week. Then I moved her in with me. And once she was living with me, all of her mail was coming to my house. And that was really when I started taking over her finances. And then I moved her into a memory care facility after 2 years. And my family moved into another house. And the new owner said, "Well, we're getting mail for your mom." And it was this notice from her, the firm, the financial institution that had this account that I didn't even know existed, saying, "We're going to turn it over to the state for inactivity." And I was like, "Oh my gosh."
Oh my goodness, with $50,000 in it?
With $50,000. And I'm like, "What is this? I didn't even know this account existed." And so then I had to jump through all these hoops. Even though I was her power of attorney, it was still a headache getting access to that account. And then I just cashed it out, used it to pay for her care. These are the type of things that happen when you don't have these conversations. And I know we were talking about the will initially, but what's even more important is that power of attorney document and the healthcare power of attorney document. If your parent is no longer mentally competent and hasn't named you or someone else as power of attorney to make financial decisions for them, then what you have to do is go to court. You
Okay.
can't just access their bank account, even if you, like, let's say you have the username and password. Well, legally, you're really not even supposed to be making transactions in that bank account unless you've been named power of attorney. You certainly can't sign checks. You can't sell a house for your parent. You can't file tax returns. You can't get on the phone with Medicare or their Medicare Advantage insurer. You can't talk to the Social Security Administration for your parent unless you are named power of attorney. And if you haven't been named power of attorney and your parent is no longer mentally competent, has had a stroke, is in a coma, then you have to go to court to be named conservator or guardian. And that can cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. You're putting your parent on trial to prove that your parent is no longer competent. You've got to get doctors to testify. You've got to hire attorneys for yourself, your parent. It's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And this can be avoided by having these conversations.
And it really isn't that much work to do it. Like, so I use, and I recommend this. There's this app you can use, which I absolutely love, that I recommend to all of the people that, read my website and are in my online community. It's called Legalshield. Have you heard of it? It's like a $25 app.
Yes.
For something, if they just want something quick, they can use that to get it just right out the door. And then they can do it at a later time, a couple years later when they can afford like a bigger will package, they can do that. Because a will package for some people can be upwards of $1,000.
It can, but that's a small cost considering what you'd have to pay to go to court.
Exactly.
When you're dealing with, a parent who's died without a will, or if you have to go to court to be named conservator or guardian. And I would say if you have a very simple financial situation, using an online product for a will is fine. Using an online product for that living will,
the power of attorney.
Proxy.
Yep.
The power of attorney is the one thing that I would certainly encourage people to meet with an attorney, like an estate planning attorney or an elder law attorney, because you don't want a generic power of attorney. You want something that is going to comply with your state's laws, and you want to discuss, or your parent wants to discuss, what sort of powers they want to give their power of attorney, their agent, what sort of powers they might want to withhold. You need to make sure you get that right, because it's not going to help anyone if you're named power of attorney, but let's say it's not a durable power of attorney. So it's
what is that? So explain that. What does that mean?
So what you want your parents to have is a general durable power of attorney. General means you are giving that person really broad powers.
Okay.
They can handle any sort of financial transaction. The opposite of that is limited. So maybe they're only going to limit you to make real estate transactions, for example. Okay.
Okay.
So you want it to be general, covering like any type of financial transaction. And durable means that it remains in effect once the person is no longer mentally competent.
Mm.
Sometimes people like the idea of the springing power of attorney. Oh, you can't have any power now, but once a doctor deems me mentally incompetent. But that's a hurdle that you're making your agent jump over, and it just makes it more
Mm.
difficult. And if your parents are reluctant to give you this power right away because it takes effect immediately, just say, look, I have no power unless I have that document. You
Right.
put it someplace safe and tell me how to access it and under what circumstances. Maybe your parents can say, look, if I get that diagnosis of dementia, Parkinson's, Lewy body, whatever, then you can go find it in my home safe. And then you can, start acting as my power of attorney,
Hmm.
because you're going to have to show the document to financial institutions. They're not just going to take your word for it.
Right. That's a good point because, after I got divorced, I still have my ex-husband as my power of attorney because we're good friends and I trust him because I want all of the money to go to my children, And so, but the power of attorney is in my safe in my house. So he knows that if I were to pass away, he knows where to access it so that he can go and, but it's an open one. So he can, sell the house, get the money for the kids, all of that kind of a thing, but when I got it, I didn't realize that there was, what did you call it? A springy one?
There's like a springing power of attorney.
Squishy
Yes.
or
So squishy.
squishy power.
It doesn't spring into effect until there is some sort of event that is spelled out in the
Right.
document. And that just makes it harder for people to step into the role of power of attorney. You don't want to make it difficult. People, I know you want to protect yourself, and people do abuse power of attorney, so you need to choose wisely. Choose
Mhm.
someone you trust. And another thing that people should know is you don't need to name all of your kids. In fact, you shouldn't name all of your kids, and people shouldn't feel bad about just choosing one family member or one trusted person, because when you've got two people, um, they can end up fighting over how mom and dad's money is managed. If they do want to name more than one kid, they need to allow them to act independent of each other so that they
Mhm.
don't have to be in the same room to sign documents. They don't both have to get on the phone with the bank. That just makes it harder.
Is a little bit of a concern for me that I'm a co-executor with my stepbrother just because we don't, you know, our parents got married later in life in their mid 50s, maybe early 60s. And there's just we get along amazing. So
But
but
really,
again,
you should be your father's. He can be his mother's,
right.
and um, that would just make more
That would
sense.
make
And
a
they
lot
should
more
have
sense.
separate wills. They should not have a joint will.
Yeah,
Everyone
that's
needs, his or her own will.
yeah, I have to look into that a little bit more. I'll have to look at the will that they sent me because I'm a little surprised that they have a joint will, to be honest, because I know that I'm pretty sure they keep their finances separate. So I'll have to look into that. Conversations. These are the
Conversation.
things, right? Hard money conversations, like especially you're just like, oh, those are the things that it's just really hard to talk about. So once your mom started, declining even more and more and more, did you have conversations with her as her, how did you start taking over her finances? What are some of the things you started talking to her about as you started seeing her memory go further and further downhill?
So, like I said, I was named a power of attorney. We went to the bank, and then I was able to create an online account and see what was going on there. And I noticed that my mom had a lot of cash in her checking account, a whole lot of cash. And I thought, this is not safe, because if she gets taken advantage of, there goes her money.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the first conversations I had with her is, Mom, let's take some of this cash. Let's take a lot of this cash and put it into a safer vehicle. I decided that an annuity would be a good choice for her. Um, because I write about personal finance, I understand what the various investments that are available, the various types of insurance that are available for people. But if you are not financially savvy, I encourage you to work with a financial advisor,
Mm-hmm.
get some help, reach out to an accountant. Um, so, I knew that an annuity would be a good choice for her. I wanted a fixed rate annuity. So I knew the interest rate was going to be, consistent, and essentially the money couldn't be touched for a certain number of years, but I knew it was going to be there. It was going to continue to grow, and then we could use that money to pay for her care.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took this large chunk of cash that was in her checking account, put it into annuity. We talked about it. We did it together. And then, I just, what some of the things I started doing, going through her mail with her to get a sense of what sort of bills she paid, and really to take all of those charitable solicitations that she was getting and writing checks to left and right, kind of
Mm.
sorting those out of the mail, because that's a big issue. When someone is experiencing cognitive decline, their financial decision making ability declines. And so you need to be involved with your parents' finances if they have dementia from the get-go, because they will probably have been making financial mistakes already before they
Mm.
even show signs of memory loss. And
So
so
she was writing checks to like charitable organizations
Oh,
left and right and just
oh, yes, and
handing
these
out
weren't
money.
even organizations she had ties to. There was one in particular, and I wrote about this in my book. So she was a preschool teacher at a Catholic school, and she was getting these solicitations from a group with a name that was similar to the school where she was a teacher. And
But
so
it
I don't
wasn't the
think she clearly,
school.
no, no. And I knew because every month there was a letter from this organization, and there were all of those gifts that you get when you make donations around her house. So these are things that you should be paying
Oh,
attention to,
wow.
going through the mail. And so I would take them, and just throw them away before she even had a chance, because I didn't want her giving away all of her money. And then
Mm.
it got to the point too where I was, she would go out and sign up for new credit cards. Like every time she would go to a store and buy something, I think that they would say, "Oh, hey, do you want to save some money? Sign up for the card." And so she had all these retail credit cards. And I would, again, either intercept them when they came in the mail, or essentially go through her wallet and take away the cards so that she would only have one, not five or six, which would increase the chance that she's going to lose it. It's going to be stolen. Sometimes, honestly, it was just easier to take that card out of the wallet rather than sit and have a long conversation, because she was going to forget that we
Forget
had
it
the
anyway.
conversation anyway. And I didn't have any ulterior motives. My motive was to protect my mom, and so I was
Hmm.
doing everything to protect her. And then once she moved in with me, it was just easier
Yep.
because all the bills were coming to me and I could handle everything. I just took it over for her.
If you started 2022 with more debt than you'd like to have, you're not alone. Debt.com is here to help. Whether you still have holiday credit card debt to pay off or student loan payments are starting to build up again, maybe you even have debt collectors that are hounding you for payments you just can't make. The experts at Debt.com can help. Finally, one website can help you solve your debt problems. Credit cards, back taxes, student loans, medical debt, collections, you name it, Debt.com can help you solve it. And they do it with no judgments, because they understand that when people end up in debt, it's usually for things outside their control, like job loss or divorce or some other hardship. So if you're in debt, visit laurengrutman.com/debt to get the relief you need, or call 888-431-2044 to get a free consultation with a debt relief specialist. Find solutions to get out of debt, fix your credit, and get on the path to achieving your financial goals. When life happens, visit Debt.com.
When you have these conversations with your parents, you've got to find out, do they have those estate planning documents? But it's important to talk about long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do they have a way to pay for it?
Mm-hmm.
What sort of care would they want? Most people are going to say they want to receive care at home. And you say, great, mom, dad, I understand that you want to age in place. I know you want to stay in your house, but is your house going to allow you to age in place? Do you live in a 2-story home? How are you going to get up and down the stairs? How are you going to maintain the yard? How are you going to maintain the house? Maybe it's a good idea to downsize to a smaller house now.
Mm-hmm.
So you can stay in that house without moving. Maybe it's a good idea to move into an apartment, or maybe it's a good idea to move into a senior living community, and choose
Mm-hmm.
the right words,
Yep. Yep.
independent living community or a continuing care community, because there are plenty of places out there where they have independent living, and then you can move into the assisted living facility, the memory care facility, the skilled nursing facility, all on one campus. But there are lots of
Mm-hmm.
places out there, and it's not that a nursing home is your only option. And people
Right.
don't realize this necessarily. And so having these conversations to figure out where your parents want to receive care and how they're going to pay for that care are so important, because most likely they don't have a plan to pay
Mm-hmm.
for their care. And we're talking thousands of dollars a month. My mom was in Kentucky, so we're paying around $5,000 a month for her memory care. She was in memory care for 8 years.
Mm.
The cost of her care was more than $500,000. More than $500,000. How many people have that much money?
Right.
I was fortunate. She did not have long-term care insurance. She couldn't get it. That would have helped pay for some of that care. Fortunately, she owned her house, so we used those assets. She had some money in a retirement account, an IRA. She had Social Security benefits, and she had an inheritance. And every single day, I would say a little thank you to my mom for not having blown that inheritance. And I
Mm-hmm.
used that money very strategically over the years to pay for her care. But most people don't have an inheritance they can rely on. Most people don't have a lot of retirement savings. Most people don't have long-term care insurance. But if you have these conversations early enough, while your parents are still in their 50s, they can apply for long-term care insurance, or they can apply for a life insurance policy with long-term care benefits, or they can start setting aside more money in their retirement account to cover that cost of care. They can downsize sooner rather than later, have a smaller mortgage, or pay it off entirely by selling a larger home. And then there's more money to pay for that care, because if they don't have a plan, guess what? You are your parents' long-term care plan. And that means you're going to have to stop working, most likely, because being a caregiver can really be a full-time job.
Now, was she living with you those whole 8 last years, or it was a day program, or she was in a facility?
Like I said, 2 years after her diagnosis, she was on her own, but I had someone who was driving
Going
my
in there,
parents
right?
and staying with her. She lived with me for 2 years. And
Okay.
because I had two young kids at the time and a full-time job, I actually had someone coming in every day on the weekday. But I would get up in the morning, make her breakfast, make sure she took her medicine. Someone was there during the day to feed her lunch, and then I would feed her dinner. She would eat with us, make sure she took her medicine. I was caring for her on the weekend. But when it got to the point where she really needed round the clock, full-time professional care, that's when I moved her into a memory care facility.
Okay.
She was there for 8 years, but I was still involved with her care. I would take her to the doctor's office. I would take her to the hospital. I was managing her finances for her. It got to the point where I couldn't do it by myself. And I know a lot of people think, well, my spouse, my partner will care for me. But if you are like your grandmother, 96 years old, if her husband was still alive and he was 96 or 97, he probably wouldn't have the strength. And, usually it's the woman caring for a man. And how
Mm-hmm.
many 85-year-old women can help their 85-year-old husband get in and out of bed, get up and down the stairs. So there needs to be a plan other than the spouse
Now,
care.
where would you recommend people start looking for long-term care insurance?
An independent insurance agent.
Okay. That's where I always
Someone,
suggest that people look for any
yes.
insurance. So,
And
yep.
if you want to find someone who specializes in long-term care insurance policies, or you can decide whether they want the long-term care or that life insurance policy with the long-term care benefits. A lot of people don't like the idea of buying a policy they might never use.
Mm-hmm.
And with the life insurance, if they don't use it for long-term care needs, then there will still be that death benefit that goes to beneficiaries when they die. And so someone's going to get the money one way or the other. And a lot of
Right.
people like that much more than the idea of a policy that they might never use.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. And I think, I'm not, I'll have to, like, as we're talking about this, I'm like, I have so many questions. I'm going to call my dad and my mom and see what is going on. Cause I just need to go look through all my documents, cause I just got them and I read through them and I'm like, okay, I got it. I got the documents, but I don't know if I read through them 100% yet, Ooh.
But at least they have the documents.
At least they have the documents. That's a good thing. That's a good start, right?
It's a good thing. It's a good start.
Yep. So, okay. So as your mom's health started to decline and she did eventually pass away, right?
Yes.
A couple years ago. Was it just this year? Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. I know, I remember, because we're Facebook friends and we've been friends, and I feel like this financial circle where we just all love each other and get along, so I was sad to hear that. But when she did eventually pass away, did you feel like you did everything the right way? Or do you look back and say, I wish I would have done this different? Or what are your thoughts, at the end of how you handled everything?
I certainly wish I would have had conversations with her before she started experiencing memory loss. Like I said, then I wouldn't have had to play detective. I wouldn't have almost lost an account with $50,000 in it. And, it would have been better to have had those conversations just so that I would have known what her wishes were more clearly, as opposed to having conversations as she was forgetting things and experiencing that cognitive decline. The one thing that I would point out is that even though I knew all the details of her finances when she died, it was still difficult settling her estate. And I can't imagine what people go through if they don't know the details of their parents' finances. They're grieving, and now they're having to spend, I don't know, days, weeks, months going through their parents' homes, trying to find documents, trying to figure out what sort of accounts they had. That would be an absolute nightmare, because even when you know what assets there are, how to access the accounts, it's still a challenge settling that estate. It's not easy. And so, that's another reason to have these conversations, and you just let your parents know, hey, I love you and I want to be able to help you if you ever need help. And to do that, I need some information. And when it's the conversation about the estate planning documents, it's letting them know, I want to know what your wishes are. But hey, think of this as a gift to me. I of course, I don't want to see you gone. But when that time comes, it's going to be hard enough because I'll be grieving. And if I know where everything is, it's going to make it easier for me. It's going to make it easier for my siblings. And so think of this as a gift to me. And if your parents can afford to get those documents, make it a gift to them. If you can afford to pay for them to meet with an attorney, then hey, we've got, for Christmas, for Mother's Day, for Father's Day, for whatever, for birthdays, offer to buy them that suite of estate planning documents. Set up a meeting with an attorney. And if you can afford to pay for long-term care insurance or a life insurance policy, and your siblings want to chip in and help, then offer that as a solution, because yes, it's going to cost you money, but it's going to cost you less than having to give up a job or raise your own savings or take on debt to care for a parent.
That's all good advice. And I was thinking, I saw the other day, an estate planning flash drive of just putting all of your documents on a flash drive and then sticking it in your safe, and it just has all of your account information and all of that, so that everybody knows where your account stuff is. And I have a fireproof safe in my house that anybody who's a part of my estate knows exactly where it is. And, that's where I keep all of my stuff organized, all of my accounts, everything. So maybe people should start thinking about that too, like just having a centralized location of all of their accounts and where all their paperwork is, so that if something were to happen, they have that, a centralized place. So, I appreciate you so much coming on. I know this is such a hard topic. Like, I'm even just sitting here like, oh gosh, I got so much work to do. It's so much work to do, but it's an uncomfortable one. And even though like me and my dad and my mom, we are very open with finances. We're open to talk about it. I mean, they know what I do, and we talk about it. It's still an uncomfortable conversation. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about what happens, when your health is declining and all of that. But it's been interesting watching my dad deal with his mom, because it's opened up a lot of conversations for me to talk to him about, okay, I'm watching you go through this with her as she's still alive. So how can we make sure that we talk about this now? And one of my sisters lives close to my parents, and I live like 3 hours from them. So, I was just there over the holidays. And my mom has COVID. And so I stayed a couple extra days longer just, to run her errands for her and do her, groceries and all that kind of stuff. So I could drop them off on her porch. And it gave me a little taste of like, when she's older, like, how am I going to be able to help out living so far away? I don't like that. I wish I lived closer. So, I don't know, maybe.
It's a conversation to have. And, Lauren, you brought up a really good point. And this is a great way to have the conversation. If you have a parent who is helping their parents, that's a great way to start the conversation naturally. I'm watching your experience with your mom. What can we do so that we don't end up in a situation like that? Or what can we do to plan for a situation like that? It's a great way to start the conversation. If you have taken steps recently to get your own finances in order, to get your own estate planning documents, maybe you got a will using an online service, tell your parents about that. Hey, I just did this. Here's where my documents are. By the way, do you have these estate planning documents? Where can I find yours? So you can use your own experience or talk about that life experience that your parents have had to start these conversations in a natural way. Then it won't be so awkward.
Yep. It's so true. And, I was thinking about too, I have my dad's estate stuff, but I don't know where it is in his house. It's probably in his office, but I mean, it's like it's like a treasure hunt, right? If you don't know where it is and all of that. So I definitely think that there are some ways. And one thing that you pointed out too, that I want to just mention is anytime you go through a divorce or a life change, like people don't realize you have then that will is like null and void. Like you need to update that will. And that's super important to do that as soon as possible. I remember when I went through my divorce, that was one of the first things that my lawyer told me to do is go make sure you update that will because your kids need to know what's going on with everything. And you don't want to get stuck in probate court for, to 8, 10 a year, a month, and it's the greatest gift to your children. So if you're a parent out there who has children, like, please go out and get a will. You can literally go to an online service and do it. Just if you're like, I'm broke and I can't do it. I tell people to use Legalshield. You sign up for the app. It's $25. And that gives you a free will package. Living gives you a healthcare proxy, the living will, power of attorney, and a will. And then you bring it to a local lawyer and he goes over it with you and does all the signing with you. That to me, if you're like in a pinch and you can't afford a big lawyer, and then you can do a bigger package later. That way, at least you have something, like just something. Like I can't imagine passing away without a will.
I agree. And if you're a parent and you have small children, you need a will to name a guardian for your children. Because again, I mean, you think it's bad enough for a judge to decide who gets your stuff? Well, a judge is also going to decide who gets your kids. And it might be someone you don't want raising your children. Got to put it in writing.
Yep. I totally agree. Like it's the greatest gift to your children to give them peace of mind after you pass away. So I appreciate you coming on today so much.
Of course.
And talking about me. Yeah, this is like, I mean, I talk about a lot of hard money stuff on this show, but this one for me is like, it's hard, and
it's so important.
It's so important. And it's interesting.
You're going to have the conversation. You're going to have it one way or the other.
Right. Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not, it's better to plan and do it in advance rather than to do it when you're forced to in the middle of an emergency.
Right. So why don't you tell people where they can find you? Because you do so much good stuff. You have a book out and I mean, so much good stuff. So why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. So I think the easiest way is if you go to CameronHuddleston.com, which is my website, and there are links to my book, which is Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk. And I've got some free resources on my website that you can download. And when I find the time, I write blog posts too.
When you're not writing for everybody else.
When I'm not writing for other people, yes, who pay me to write, then occasionally I will post things on my blog too. But there are plenty of resources there.
Yeah. So I'll post all of those links that you talked about in the show notes for everybody. But thank you so much for coming on and talking. Always a pleasure to hang out with you. And thanks for bringing this hard money talk to us today.
Thank you.
Okay, friends, I don't know how you feel after listening to that hard money talk, but I know that I feel like I have a lot of work to do talking to my parents about their finances. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Hard Money Talk Show. As always, I have the show notes over at laurengrootman.com/podcast, where you can pick up all of the things that we talked about today on the show and learn more about Cameron and all of the work that she does as well. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. And I always love any reviews or anything like that. I always love to hear from all of you. So thank you so much for tuning in to another episode, and we'll see you next week. Bye.